to a study, this many years ago, but it was in the BBC recently, that being slightly distracted from the task at hand boosts your abstract thinking ability, and this can lead to generating creative ideas. Being around other people who are working can also motivate us to do the same, as opposed to working alone. And the article cited that some of the most successful people in history have worked at a cafe. That includes Picasso and J.K. Rowling. So, Nikki, are you one of those people who work at a cafe?
I don't do it that often, but I actually do find it quite productive. I do, because when I'm at home, I work at home anyway, but I have in the past and occasionally do go into a cafe and have a little working session. If I really need to write something, it's a good way of doing it, because at home I'm much more distracted than I am in a cafe. And there is something and there is something about having other people around you and a bit of noise and activity going on that does kind of focus you. It does for me, anyway.
Because I've always kind of poo-pooed the idea, and I sort of look over at people who have their laptops open in busy, noisy cafes, Chris, going, what are you trying to do? But clearly I'm wrong.
Well, I must again be a contrarian, because if I'm sitting in a cafe, I like it, and I certainly love my coffee. But I'm people watching. I'm seeing I'm distracted by what's happening around me.
Absolutely.
What their buzz is, what their thing is. But if they say it's slightly distracting and that helps, well, I tend to get slightly distracted with my entire life, so I don't really know what the issue is here.
I get much more distracted at home, because I'm thinking, okay, look, I need to just go and do those dishes, or just go put a load of washing on.
It's quite
all
true,
the things
isn't it?
like that. So when I'm out away from home, I'm far more focused on the task.
Have you found that during lockdown? It's very hard to sit at a desk at home.
Yes.
There's something about the home stage where you go, oh gosh, that kitchen bench does need a wipe down.
You just need to do those couple of little chores, and then it's 11 o'clock and you've done nothing.
There is this idea, the article said, of quote-unquote stochastic resonance, the phenomenon in which just the right level of noise benefits our senses. So
that's called good music with
good
bagpipes.
Music. Good linking in there, Chris. Speaking of which, we'll try and get a bagpiper on for tomorrow. Hey, Chris Wikara and Nikki Pazant, thank you
all
so much
for
being with me.
Pleasure.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, Friday.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, a temporary clampdown and managed isolation following more community cases of COVID. There's 3 confirmed now. But how was the virus passed on in MIQ? The DG of Health joins us with the latest. So what's happening inside the Pullman Hotel right now? Well, we check in with someone on the inside. COVID checkpoints in Te Tai Tokerau are shut down by police. And speaking of border control, Australia's locked us out for another 72 hours. So really, what chance of a travel bubble? In other news, scrubbing up the precious wetlands in Kaikoura, forget storks, baby flamingos deliver newborns to Auckland Zoo, and a 12-year-old goes eye to eye with a shark.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with the NA. Returnees in all MIQ facilities will now have to stay in their rooms after they have had their Day 12 test. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says this is an interim measure as they work to establish how guests contracted the virus while at the Pullman Hotel isolation facility in Auckland. 3 people are now suspected to have contracted the virus while at the hotel. Mr Hipkins says he wants more time to consider the change before deciding whether it will be a permanent requirement. The Ministry of Health is waiting for the COVID test results of more than 50 former guests. Contact tracers have been contacting all guests who left the hotel between January the 9th and the 13th. Mr Hipkins says of the 353 guests who left the hotel and have been asked to get a test and self-isolate, 301 have received a test result. The latest COVID cases from the Pullman Hotel continued to go out despite a plea for them to self-isolate. The Ministry of Health says 2 supermarkets were visited by at least one of the cases 2 days after that direction was given. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says they may not have been aware of the advice initially, but would have been rung.
The direction was given, and then everyone was phoned, of course, and asked to do that. And it may well be they hadn't heard the public announcements, and that's why everyone is phoned as well, and direct contact is made. And my clear understanding is that once that contact had been made, they did exactly what was asked. They isolated and then were tested.
Mr Bloomfield says contact tracers do have good contact information for guests who leave managed isolation. The Australian government has announced it will extend its freeze of quarantine-free travel with New Zealand for 3 more days, following the news of the latest 2 positive cases. Here's our political reporter Charlie Drever.
The initial 72-hour suspension was due to expire at 2 o'clock this afternoon. However, Australian health officials are now seeking further information about the latest 2 cases in Auckland. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she retains confidence in New Zealand's systems and processes. However, she does acknowledge the decision to extend the freeze is for the Australian government to make. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Maori Party leaders won't be travelling to Waitangi for commemorations because the risk of COVID-19 getting into the community is too high. Co-leaders Debbie Ngarewa-Packer and Rawiri Waititi say they're taking a cautious approach, and there's nothing more important than protecting whakapapa. Mrs Ngarewa-Packer says Aotearoa is at greater risk than it's ever been of a significant outbreak.
What we seem to have is officials in the Ministry of Health saying, we've got it under control, Yet every day we've risen with another surprise. They haven't got it under control, and that's okay, it's new, but they have to get it under control. The reality is, until we know what we're contending with, it should be absolute caution.
Debbie Ngarewa-Packer says the government is to reduce border numbers. A huge wave of water has been flowing down Aro Street in central Wellington after a water main burst. Wellington Water has located the broken main and says there is no loss of service to nearby residents. The council says locals should expect disruption into the evening as repairs are completed. RNZ video journalists captured the water spewing about 10 to 20 metres into the air. This eyewitness says the water has flooded his garage.
Well, all the drains down here are now filled up with all this silt and rocks, so I'm just going through, clearing it up as best I can, try to let the water through. That's my property over there, and it was flooding through the garage, so came out with my trusty broom and got it all done.
Motorists are asked to avoid the area. It's 4 minutes past 5. In sport, American Magic appear to have pulled off a fast repair job on their America's Cup boat, but they might have one more hurdle to overcome. Racing begins in the Challenger Series semi-final between the Americans and Italy's Luna Rossa tomorrow. The deadline for the teams to present their boats in full race set up to the regatta's measurement committee was yesterday afternoon. However, as of this morning, regatta director Ian Murray still hadn't given both boats final sign-off.
Measurers are out there doing the rounds, checking all the many details, the sails, the weighing, crew weighing. It's just an ongoing process of just administration of double and triple checking every single part of the boat and declaring them fit to race.
Ian Murray. The veteran Blues hooker James Parsons is the latest rugby player to retire because of a head injury. The 34-year-old played 2 tests for the All Blacks and sits behind only Kevin Mealamu, Jerome Kaino and Tony Woodcock in all-time caps for the Blues. Jennifer King has made history by becoming the first black woman to be appointed a full-time coach in American football's NFL. She's been appointed assistant running backs coach at Washington. Manchester United has suffered a shock 2-1 home loss to Sheffield United in football's English Premier League. The result leaves Manchester City alone at the top of the table. That's the news.
2 more COVID cases linked to an isolation hotel.
We will probably stop putting new people into the Pullman, so we'll slowly empty it out for a little bit just to see what we can find out about what might be happening there.
Aucklanders line up for tests.
There's cars snaking around the little road that goes along next to the stadium. So, a lot of people waiting to be tested this morning.
And in Northland, checkpoints return.
We would prefer action being taken now. Try and limit that travel so that as many people as possible are kept safe.
Check in with Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods, brief light showers possible tonight and again tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Waikato, Waitomo and Central High Country, fine spells, a few evening showers tonight. Taranaki to Kapiti, a few showers clearing tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Fine and hot, a few showers in Wairarapa and Wellington, spreading north today, then becoming confined to the coast tomorrow. For Marlborough, Canterbury, showers, some heavy with thunderstorms and hail in Canterbury today, showers becoming isolated tomorrow morning. Nelson, Buller, Westland, Northern Fiordland, Southern Lakes, Central and North Otago. Cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing Fiordland and Otago tonight. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, showers, some heavy easing tonight. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers from this evening. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's temporarily toughening up managed isolation rules in the wake of a growing number of community COVID cases. 3 people are now confirmed to have caught the more contagious South Africa strain of the virus from a fellow returnee in managed isolation. A Northland woman, a father and his young daughter were allowed to leave the Pullman hotel after initially returning negative tests. Swipe card data shows the so-called index case and 3 returnees were out of their rooms at the same time on various occasions in various combinations. But the exact means of transmission is not yet known. The Pullman Hotel is not taking on any more returnees until officials find out what exactly has gone wrong. Once the hotel is eventually empty, it'll be deep cleaned. In the meantime, across all MIQ facilities, all returnees will be confined to their rooms for the final 3 days of isolation to avoid any cross-contamination. That's a temporary measure at this stage. And in the past hour, Australia's Acting Chief Medical Officer, Michael Kidd, has hit pause again on the Trans-Tasman travel bubble until at least Sunday.
We know that 12 people who are in quarantine at the Pullman Hotel have arrived in Sydney. 3 of these people have travelled on to Hong Kong and the authorities there have been advised. 2 of these people travelled on to Queensland and the authorities there have also been advised. The others are all being followed up in New South Wales and are being tested. If I receive additional information about further arrivals, I will provide further advice. On Monday, I advised that anyone who had arrived in Australia on a flight from New Zealand on or since January the 14th should isolate and arrange to get tested and remain in isolation until their results are known. I'm now extending that advice. Anyone who has arrived in Australia on a flight from New Zealand on or since January the 9th is asked to isolate and arrange to get a test and remain in isolation until they've received a negative test result. In particular, if you were in hotel quarantine or a guest or a staff member at the Pullman Hotel in Auckland between January the 9th and January the 14th, please isolate at your home, arrange to get tested for COVID-19 and follow the advice of the health authorities in your state.
Back here, I asked Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, how the 3 infected people might have come into contact when they were out of their rooms.
What I can say is that there was no point in time when all 3 were simultaneously out of their rooms, but there were a small number of times over a 3-day period when the index case and one or other of the other 2 or the other 3 were out of their rooms. And they're periods of time that vary from a few minutes to perhaps half an hour, often coinciding with exercise breaks perhaps. We're still looking into what the nature of any interaction might have been, in particular whether they used something like a lift either at the same time or, very close, in very close proximity to each other time-wise.
Do you suspect they were exercising at the same time in the same area?
That's possible, and that's one of the things that will be looked at. So far, there is no evidence for that, and there's no CCTV footage for that. So it may well be more that they were just passed through a common area if we're thinking about the possibility of airborne transmission, or that, that fomite transmission, one used the lift straight after the other and there may have been contamination there. Those are the things we're looking at.
The man and the young girl, who are now confirmed as infected, when did your contact tracers talk to them, and when exactly did they have their first test?
So they actually had their first test the day before yesterday. The results came back yesterday, my recollection is late morning, and then the contact tracers spoke with them, got people to go out and do a retest, because those first test results, and I spoke to the team in Auckland and my team here, it wasn't clear whether this was definitely a current infection or an historical infection, or indeed, as we had seen the day before, actually one that had turned out to be a false positive. So urgent retesting while the interviews were done. Auckland Regional Public Health then started as a precautionary process to contact some of the places they had been, just to give them a heads up. And as soon as we had that second confirmatory test back and we had agreed, yes, this does look like these are acute infections, that's when we sent the information out more widely.
So were they out and about while they were waiting on test results?
No, they weren't. As soon as they were contacted by our contact tracers and asked to isolate and be tested, they did isolate then.
Once they had direct contact, but when you made that general appeal on the Sunday that people should stay home, get a test and not go out until they had a result, did they not hear that message? Because they subsequently were out and about, weren't they?
Yes, they were out and about, and look, I have to assume they didn't hear the message, and the people who spoke with them will know more about that than I do. But, you know, what I can say is as soon as they were contacted and asked to isolate and be tested, that's exactly what they did do, and then remained isolated until the result came back.
So are you getting to people fast enough then?
Oh, I think we're getting to them very quickly, actually. Our team has managed to get to all 354 people who had been in the Pullman. They were working right through the day and into the evening from as soon as we knew, and I think it was a good call for us to follow up and call each of those people.
But you have two people here who've been wandering around for 2 days before they hear from you directly and then self-isolate. So that's 2 days where they could have been in contact with hundreds of people. That would suggest you're not getting to them fast enough, doesn't it?
It does mean there were 2 days, but I can tell you our team were working hard and we did get to everybody, which is, I think, a very good result.
The genome sequencing connects these two latest cases to the Northland case and the so-called index case. But how close is the connection? Could there be other cases in between the Northland case and these two?
Well, that's something we do consider. What I can say is in the case of the Northland case that we found out a few days ago, the genome sequence was identical to the index case. In this latter two, there's a slight difference in the genome, but they're clearly linked. Now, they do change, from one person to another. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they do. But there's nothing to suggest at the moment that there's an intermediary between the index case and these two latest ones.
So what's happening with people at the Pullman at the moment? So you've got a no new people in, no people out right now. How much longer will returnees who would have been due out, do they have to stay there for?
Actually, we kept the people who were due to go yesterday. They were kept overnight, but then they were released around the middle of the day today because they had all been retested and returned a negative test. The thing we have implemented in the Pullman, and the EMB team is implementing across our managed isolation facilities, is until we've really got to the bottom of this as an interim measure, we're keeping people in their rooms after that day 12 test, just as a precautionary measure. And once we've got to the bottom of this, we'll see if we're going to continue that.
So you are releasing people from the Pullman on a daily basis now?
Certainly, the people who were due to go yesterday went today, but what we are doing now is, of course, keeping them in their room after that day 11-12 test.
So you would have locked people down, but people who would have been due to leave today, have they been allowed to leave?
They are allowed to leave. Whether they've gone or not, I couldn't say. But there's no, now that we've got this arrangement in place where people are in their rooms after that last test, then we feel it's safe for them to leave.
The Minister has said there's something wrong at the Pullman, and obviously we can see that. You have people now, some of them locked in their rooms. Are they safe there? Because you haven't worked out exactly how this is spreading.
Yes, we do think they're safe there. And one of the things I would point out is that all three of these cases have been infected from the one index case. The latter two cases that we talked about last night and released last night haven't been infected by another person. So we've got sort of a common exposure event here, which suggests there was a specific issue there rather than a more systemic problem. But of course, what we want to do is rule out any systemic issue, and there's a lot of extra work that's going in the Pullman to make sure people are safe.
I was interested to hear that there's going to be a change in procedures, that staff working at managed isolations will only be allowed to service basically one MIQ facility. So have staff working in these hotels been moving between facilities?
There are some staff who do work across different facilities, not all of them. Obviously, the hotel staff are dedicated to their hotel, but sometimes different staff who are rostered on from the various organisations that contribute, like health, like Defence Force and so on, they do work across facilities. But remembering they're all on a testing regime, and they are all working to the same high levels of infection prevention control.
Understand that, Dr Bloomfield, but isn't it basic infection control to kind of not mix those people up?
The basic infection prevention control is to apply the same rigorous processes and procedures at every organisation that people are working at, so they know exactly what to do, the same thing at each place.
But why isn't it good enough now when it was previously?
Well, it's just a precaution we're taking, along with a number of other interim precautions, and we're just providing extra safety here while we get to the bottom of this.
Outside of the Pullman, or just generally, how many people have caught COVID in managed isolation?
Actually, that's a question I've been asked earlier today, and I've got the team member here with me who's going to find that information, and we will make that available.
Have you been tracking it?
Yes, we have. We look very carefully at every case that comes up with a positive test. If they've had a negative test early in their stay and then subsequently return a positive test, we want to rule out whether there's been any transmission inside the facility. Most of them are historic cases, or they are just a late presentation of an acute case.
You mentioned confining people to their rooms for 3 days after the day 12 test. That is a temporary arrangement, according to the Minister. What would you need to see to make that a permanent requirement?
Yeah, look, it's an interim recommendation, and we're looking at the full range of things we might do inside the facilities to help reduce any residual risk further. And one of those, a really important one, is the cohorting of people when they come in that the Minister spoke to today.
And that was Dr Ashley Bloomfield. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. No more people will be put into managed isolation at the Pullman Hotel until further notice. Tinani French is in managed isolation at the Pullman and joins me now. How are you doing, Tinani, with all of this going on?
Doing well, Lisa. We're still in our rooms, still hanging in there, trying to make the most of it.
What have they told you about what's going on?
So they've slipped a couple of letters underneath our door just to let us know that, just to basically acknowledge that there are a couple of cases connected to the hotel, and that they're doing everything they can to review the situation and to figure out if they can find out why that happened.
Have you been out of your room in the last 24 hours?
No. They asked us to go back to our rooms about 11 o'clock yesterday morning, and we haven't heard anything else since. They've said that we should remain in our rooms today and that they'll hopefully update us by the end of the day.
Okay, so are you aware of what's going on actually in the hotel? Is there any way of telling? We're told that there's an audit going on, that they're checking air conditioning. Can you see or hear anything?
There's not a lot that we can see besides just out the peephole of the door, and the only thing I've seen today is some people kind of walking up and down the hallways with like a vaporizer machine. I'm not sure exactly what that does, but it seems like they've started deep cleaning the hotel.
What day are you up to now?
I think it's 11.
Right, so you'll be coming up for your day 12 test. Have they given you any information about the new rules that are going to apply to you?
No, nothing yet, and they haven't said anything about us potentially staying past our original release date, so that hasn't been updated yet.
Are you able, or do you, communicate with any other guests through any means at all?
Not really. I mean, they keep us pretty separate, and now that we're in our rooms, there's no opportunities to talk to anybody else.
Do you feel safe in there, Tinani?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think they are doing everything they can to try and make sure that they get to the bottom of why this happened. We've been taking whatever precautions we can, staying inside the room, obviously, keeping the windows open, It is a bit worrying if it's in the air conditioning or something like that. That's kind of out of our control. But at this point, I mean, all that we can do is hope that they are looking into everything thoroughly.
How do you feel about staying in your room? Because potentially, given what's happened, this is it for you. You're going to be in that room until you go.
Yeah, that's not great. That's not fun. It's been quite a culture change for us, just in terms of our daily routine inside managed isolation. Not being able to go outside and go for that daily walk. I never realized how much I value to walk around in a circle. But yeah, I mean, I think if this is what needs to be done to make sure that we are clear of COVID and safe to be released into the community, then that's what we'll do.
Thanks for joining us, Tanani. All the best. That is Tanani French, who's in managed isolation at the Pullman Hotel, which is obviously where these cases, these new community cases, have come from. Well, community checkpoints in Taitokoro have been shut down by police today, who say they risked public safety and people's right to travel freely. Around a dozen volunteers from Te Taitokoro Border Control Group set up in Waiomio this morning to hand out brochures and to speak to motorists about local COVID safety. But their campaign was short-lived after police blocked their checkpoint, citing traffic safety and freedom of movement concerns. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
Taitokoro Border Control didn't take long to spring into action following the latest community cases, saying the threat of an outbreak here is all too real.
We are short of health resources as things stand normally. With a flood of people coming in this weekend and coming in next weekend, a lot of them are likely to stay over during the week. We just don't have the resources.
Hone Harawira mobilised volunteers from across the rohi this morning to set up this checkpoint or information station in Waiomio, just south of Kawakawa.
So our signal to the communities who are coming up, to the visitors who are coming up, is not turn around and go home, we don't want you. It's be careful. Here's some places to go to if you want to get tested. Here's some numbers to call if you're feeling bad in the middle of the night. Don't hold it in till you get back to Auckland. Make the call, get tested as quickly as possible.
The checkpoint was up and running by 10:30 this morning with around a dozen people in full PPE and high-vis handing out brochures to motorists who were guided off the highway into a pullover area complete with cones and stopping stations. It started smoothly, police were given a warm welcome, around 60 cars stopped and the feedback was almost entirely positive.
Yeah, no, it's good that they're just reminding people to stay vigilant.
Oh, that was good. It was really helpful, just, to remind us to keep ourselves safe and things like that. That's really helpful because people forget, when it gets too long, they forget and then they loosen up. But yeah, that's really good to remind everybody.
I think they're good. They're doing a good job informing us. I wasn't aware of what services there were, so it's handy.
Any local-based, community-based safety measures is a really good thing. It's a positive.
While police aren't here to officially support the checkpoints, officers are at hand just to make sure things run smoothly and safely. But the setup was short-lived. Around an hour after it kicked off, the brakes went on. Police officers who had earlier been monitoring the process shut down the operation, blocking the pullover area with 2 patrol cars. Police citing traffic safety concerns due to motorists being encouraged to pull over. While no one would be interviewed, the Northland Area Commander, Inspector Ricky Few, said the process was not the information sharing setup they understood it would be.
Somebody from high up has made a decision that this should be cancelled. I think it's the wrong decision, and I think that I'm concerned that the people of Taitokoro may suffer as a result of heavy-handedness from the police.
Tens of thousands of visitors are expected to flood into Northland over the next 2 weeks, Auckland Anniversary and Waitangi Day making for long weekends. Hone Harawira wants an alert level change to keep the north safe, but for now it's back to the drawing board about how to spread the COVID safety word.
We'll come back to this another time, Another kōrero, another time.
In Northland for Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person, aho.
The New Zealand Stock Exchange has taken a beating, and we're not talking about sea of red in trading today. The Financial Markets Authority has delivered a scathing report outlining a litany of failures at an operational and cultural level, which prevented it from dealing appropriately with the cyber attacks it faced in August last year. Emma Hatton reports.
A blistering report by FMA standards. The stock exchange operator failed to meet its obligations under the law. Its crisis planning was left wanting, and communication with market participants was poor. Over 4 days in August, trading on the NZX was halted due to repeated distributor denial of service or DDoS attacks, which overwhelmed the operator's website and market announcement board. Dave Parry, a cybersecurity and computer science expert from AUT, says the inadequacies are shocking.
To not have a core philosophy around the maintenance of services, which, for example, telecoms company do, and banks also do as well, but to have maybe a somewhat sort of defensive attitude to, well, we're doing the best we can and we didn't expect this to happen. That really doesn't work.
He says no one would fault the operator for coming under attack, the size and scale of which was unprecedented for this country, but it was the lack of a plan B he found so concerning.
There didn't seem to be a really comprehensive emergency plan, an emergency response plan, which could have worked around an attack like this. You could have had a mitigation strategy, either shifting to other platforms or just informing people what's going on a bit more quickly.
That issue about communication also picked up by the FMA. The report reading, the NZX rarely accepts fault and is not upfront and open when things go wrong. The review was triggered after a spike in trading volumes in April, which highlighted weaknesses in the NZX's tech infrastructure. It was then broadened to include the DDoS attacks. The FMA's chief executive, Rob Everett, says there were similarities between the two events, most significantly being an underinvestment in technology and a slow response to get on top of the problems.
We felt that their technology capability wasn't where it needed to be. We thought some of their crisis planning was poor, and we also felt that there were some broader issues there about not responding to feedback from the market and others that would have given them the impetus to move some of these things along.
He denies it was up to the FMA to have picked up on the gaps sooner, saying the blame sits squarely with the operator.
You know, at the end of the day, this sits with the NZX board, and whilst we'll be keeping our eye on the actions that they're implementing and making sure that they're getting in better shape, it really sits with them.
Sam Stubbs, the head of the KiwiSaver fund Simplicity, agrees, saying it's obviously from years of underinvestment.
I think it is symptomatic of an exchange which has been very focused on making, profits for its shareholders for a very long time, and really more interested in being a funds manager than a stock exchange. When you are so tempted to make profits, you are equally tempted to underinvest in, what appears to be boring at the time, like cybersecurity, but it turns out to be very, very critical.
The NZX's chief executive, Mark Peterson, wouldn't agree to an interview today, but in a statement said it accepted the criticisms outlined in the report and that improvements are required. He said it is committed to delivering these via an action plan agreed with the FMA. That action plan is about as tough as the FMA can get under the legislation, so market participants are hopeful the NZX has learned its lesson. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
To Wellington and the ongoing water issues now, and if you can, take a look at this. If you're listening on radio, this is footage of water gushing out of a water main and pouring down the street in Aroa Valley in central Wellington. A water main burst, sending a torrent of water gushing out of the main on the corner of Durham and Aroa Street. Wellington Water says its crews responded to the incident and are working on a fix. Our video journalists Dom Thomas and Samuel Rilstone caught up with people in the area.
I live just up here in Durham, and I just heard the sound of water rushing and looked out on my deck and I saw the mighty waterfall coming on Aroa, and so I just came down, and that was about 3:10.
Get the car and pick up the young fella from daycare, so a little bit inconvenient. Yeah.
Well, all the drains down here are now filled up with all this silt and rocks, so I'm just going through, clearing it up as best I can, try to let the water through. That's my property over there, and it was flooding through the garage, so came out with my trusty broom and got it all done.
Wellingtonians there battling a broken water pipe. A 12-year-old boy who encountered a 3-metre-long mako shark at popular Auckland City Beach says it was like staring into the eyes of Jaws. Safe Swim issued an alert for Kohimarama and its neighbouring beaches yesterday following the sighting. Keen sailors and twin brothers Nico and Stavro Purdy were sailing their Optimus yachts with their Kohimarama Yacht Club team when they saw a large shadow. Stavro described the experience to reporter Eva Corlett.
So yesterday it was very light and calm and very hot. And so we're going to do some practice for the upcoming Auckland Championship. We were just setting up a start, and then what looked like a dolphin just popped up out of nowhere, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's a dolphin!" And then, like half an hour later, when I was waiting for the coach to do another start, one of the kids said, "There's a shark behind you," and I didn't notice, and then it hit my boat, and then I looked forward and I was looking, what was that? And then I see this big grey shape, which is about 3 times the length of my Opti, and it had a pretty big fin, and I just immediately altered my course, and I yelled out that there was a shark, and everyone was like, "Oh, it's just a dolphin, it's just a dolphin," until about an hour later, when after a couple more races, and the coach came, and he said that it was a shark. So Sam, who's my coach, went full speed and got a swimmer who was in the path of the shark, and then moved into safety.
Wow. And did you feel nervous when you saw it?
I was nervous, yes, but I knew I was safe inside my boat.
And when it bumped into your boat, was that quite a bump?
It was, I remember it was a bit of a jolt, and I had to look down, and I saw it was kind of like staring into the eyes of Jaws, the movie Jaws.
Yeah.
So,
have you seen sharks around that place before?
No, I've never actually. Once a dead fish drifted onto shore, but other than that, nothing.
Is that the first time you've seen a shark?
It's the first time I've seen a shark, yeah, except on TV, but...
That must have been quite an incredible experience.
I count it as an experience, but I also count it as quite something I don't really want to happen again.
I hear you, Stavro. I wouldn't want it to happen even once. That was 12-year-old Stavro Purdy speaking to reporter Eva Corlett. Surf Life-Saving Northern Region, which updates the alerts, said while the alerts have been removed, the public should remain cautious while in the water. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, restrictions are extended across the ditch, but the group in charge of the Trans-Tasman bubble says it's not popped yet. The Maori Party on why the co-leaders won't be going to Waitangi, and we check in on Auckland Zoo's latest sprog. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening about those checkpoints in Te Tai Tukaro, the police shutting them down, the new rules for managed isolation, and the time taken to track people down who need to be tested, or anything that's on your mind. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Returnees in all MIQ facilities will now have to stay in their rooms after their Day 12 test until they leave managed isolation. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says this requirement will remain until they've established how guests contracted the virus while at Auckland's Pullman hotel. 3 people are suspected to have contracted the virus in the hotel, and genome testing has linked all of them to a source case of the South African strain. Australia has announced it will extend its freeze of quarantine quarantine-free travel with New Zealand for 3 more days. The initial 72-hour suspension was due to expire this afternoon, but Australian health officials are now seeking further information about the latest 2 cases in Auckland. Maori Party leaders won't be travelling to Waitangi for commemorations of the signing of Te Tiriti because of the risk of COVID-19 getting into the community being too high. Co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer says they're taking a cautious approach and Aotearoa is at greater risk than ever of a significant outbreak. She's calling on the government to reduce border numbers. A motorist is dead after a car and train collided in South Wairarapa earlier this afternoon. The police say there was 1 person in the car and they died at the scene on Western Lake Road at Speedy's Crossing. Motorists are being asked to avoid the area and some train services have been replaced by buses. The New Zealand market fell just over 2% today, in line with weakness sweeping global markets. The NZX Top 50 Index is a sea of red following a sudden sell-off on Wall Street overnight, as delays in the manufacture of coronavirus vaccines shook investor optimism. The New Zealand dollar also fell 1 cent against the greenback and is now trading at 71.4 US cents. A huge wave of water has been flowing down Aro Street in central Wellington after a water main burst, sending a jet of water 10 to 20 metres into the air. Wellington Water has found the broken main and says residents should expect disruption into the evening as repairs are completed. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it is time for business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, let's talk about Trustpower, Tauranga-based Trustpower. What is it up to in terms of its retail business?
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot more demands on some of these big power companies to move towards renewable power. And that's in line with the government's initiative to go to 100% renewable by 2030. This is not going to be an easy order for some of these generators, including Trustpower. So they're looking at whether or not they really need to hang on to that retail business that they've got. So they've got somewhat like 231,000 customers at the moment. These customers include not just power, but also broadband services, for example. And a number of their customers are based, of course, in the Western Bay of Plenty. They get a rebate from the trust that has about a 26% share in Trustpower. If those customers are no longer Trustpower's customers, it remains to be seen where that dividend comes from and or is handed out to those consumers. So it raises a lot of questions for some of the shareholders, being, of course, the Consumer Trust, as well as, a big one for the industry who wants to buy Trustpower's retail business, their 230,000 customers. So this is a review. It's going to take a few months to undertake, but we're going to see some shakeups in that in the energy sector because of what's happening. One of the other things that's going on right now is a review of our natural gas supply and security. So there's a big review taking place, not just in one area of energy, but in others too.
Okay. Now, New Zealand's response to the pandemic has kind of made it a favourable target for merger and acquisitions, you're telling me. Why is that?
Yeah, interesting. So the perception is that New Zealand has done better than most countries in handling the pandemic and that business is as usual. I don't know that everyone would agree with that. Certainly if you're in the tourism sector, you might not. Right. However, a lot of other businesses are doing, normal business activity and investors have taken note and the phones are ringing hot in lawyers and all sorts that deal with the buy and sell of businesses, large and small. So there's demand for small businesses from, New Zealanders who are returning, wanting to find something that's going to turn a dollar for them because they may not be able to find a job. Others are bigger investors, institutional investors looking for opportunities, and they can be of any size. Now, that's quite interesting because at the same time, there's also likely to be an increase in the number of initial public offerings coming to the market. That's the share market. So, for example, My Food Bag has signaled that it wants to come to the market, and they may not be the only ones, according to Minter Ellison Rudd-Watt, who's done the report for, is that right? I did. Minter Ellison Rudd-Watts.
Yep,
I forgot the S at the end. I got to correct myself there. Never mind. They have done this report every year, and so they're saying that their inside information says there's lots of things on the pipeline.
Okay. What has been going on in the markets today then?
Okay, so you may have heard in the news just before that our market ended down just over 2%, nearly 2.2% as a matter of fact. That's 142 points down to 13,086 points. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but mostly it has to do with the pandemic and uncertainty there. And that is the same story with the dollar. So the U.S. Federal Reserve is certainly holding steady on its current interest rates. And so we are sitting at 71.4 U.S. cents. Yesterday we were at 72.4. So there you go, a whole cent down. 93.6 Australian and 52.2 pence, which is more or less steady where we were yesterday.
Yeah. Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news there. Australia has extended its travel bubble suspension for another 72 hours, and anyone travelling across the dish will be put in hotel quarantine. Despite that, the group tasked with forming a full Trans-Tasman bubble believes it could be in place in 8 weeks. The Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum has been working solidly for 10 months on an agreement to get international travel between the two countries off the ground, with two-way tourism trade worth more than $5 billion. Every time it seems the bubble is close, there's been setbacks, new cases, divided opinion, politics or nerves. The co-chair of the Leadership Forum, Anne Sherry, says any bubble needs to work on the basis there will be more COVID cases.
I think the idea that neither side of the Tasman is ever going to have a case when we've got, our citizens coming back from all over the world is fanciful. So the real question then is how do we manage the odd case that pops as these have?
Here's the thing. It was your Prime Minister who basically instantly closed the border to us with this latest community case. Was that the wrong decision, and have you been able to talk to him about it?
I think it probably comes from the health people rather than it being a political knee-jerk. I think the Prime Ministers need to keep talking to each other, and my understanding is they have been and they will continue. And we just need to find better mechanisms rather than close the border being the first thing we ever do, rather than being, the thing we do when we've got real reason to do it. So my strong preference, and I think it's true of all businesses, everyone who's trying to manage Trans-Tasman, is that we're not in the on-again, off-again button switch, that we're on, we've got mechanisms that allow us to manage it. So I don't think knee-jerking is, whether it's health officials doing it or politicians, is going to serve any of us well in the long term. We've got to find a different way of managing.
So would you categorise that recent decision as knee-jerking?
Well, look, I think it felt as though there was uncertainty on our side, about what was really going on. And that's why I think we need to have better mechanisms, constant communication, all the stuff that just makes trust easier, rather than pressing the pause button until we really get a handle on what's going on.
So do you think that we should do away with this idea that we can have a total elimination strategy? Because it sounds like what you're talking about is working with a certain number of cases, so just accepting that we are going to have clusters and outbreaks and still allowing the border to be open?
Well, I'm not sure about clusters and outbreaks. I think it's about, because what we're talking about are managing individual cases or a couple of cases. And that's been true in Australia as well. I think earlier in the piece, it was more difficult, and there was exponential growth in cases in some parts of Australia. So, that was a much more difficult position. I think elimination in our own communities, is clearly a political objective everyone's set their mast to. So, they've raised their flag to that one. So there's no way that I'm probably going to be able to do anything about that. And
would you like to, though?
I think probably. No, look, I think most people in the community are happy that we are, when you look at the UK and other parts of the world, we're all happy that we're not in that position. And they rejected elimination as a strategy and have ended up in a complete mess. So that's not where we want to be. But we do, if we're going to let our citizens back in from other parts of the world, we're just going to have good systems for managing that. And whether that's hotel quarantine, whether it's greater testing of people coming back from overseas, we've just got to put better mechanisms in place for doing that to ensure that we don't have big outbreaks as a result of it. So I'm in favour of keeping the numbers low. People want to get on about their business, and if that requires us to have maybe small hotspot declarations rather than shutting complete countries out, then that's probably a better mechanism to manage it in the long term, I reckon.
So, Anne, you would be well aware of the New Zealand Prime Minister's comments about, well, seeming to indicate that it's increasingly difficult to navigate a country-to-country travel bubble. Is it more likely that we're going to have a state-by-state arrangement?
Look, ideally you would have country-to-country, but if we can't make it, then state to New Zealand is better than nothing. So, and if that's what we need to do to start, then let's do it that way. But I
when,
think ideally, well, hopefully first quarter this year.
What?
Hopefully, because we need to.
No, Anne, sorry.
End of March. End of March is what we're still hoping for.
Really? What gives you that level of confidence?
Because there's so much work going on between the health department, between Border Force. There's a lot of activity. I think I just think we've got to keep setting ourselves some deadlines to at least try and work to. Otherwise, it just drifts off into the never, never. And we've got, on both sides of the ditch, we've got huge tourism industries, huge numbers of jobs that are just falling away from us as we procrastinate. So we've got to try and get something in place that helps keep people healthy and safe, but also doesn't completely smash what's been such an important sector for all of us, and also all those other Trans-Tasman businesses that haven't had people travelling, that are looking for ways of working that are sustainable and do keep their workforces healthy as well.
Where is the most resistance to a Trans-Tasman bubble coming from?
It's a good question. I think it varies depending on the issue and the time. So, New Zealand, having Australians, having Kiwis come to Australia has been possible until a few days ago. So that's been a bit one way, and I think so that's the option of having people fly between Australia and New Zealand both ways without quarantine, I think would be a really good start. We haven't really had that properly yet.
So is New Zealand the stick in the mud, Anne? Is New Zealand the stick in the mud here? Are we asking more of you than you are asking of us in this deal?
I think the challenge has been we haven't had coherence on the Australian side. So doing it nation to nation requires us as well to have all the states agreeing how it's going to be managed, and we haven't had that.
You have been working on this for about 10 months now, right?
Yep.
How many times have you had to adjust your deadline?
Probably once a month for 10 months. We've found something else we need to sort through to keep pushing ahead on this. So we've been at it constantly for 10 months.
And you've pretty much had to push your deadline back every month?
Yeah, we have. In some cases because we've found issues that we didn't have easy solutions or that we couldn't find easy solutions for. And in some cases just because the politics of and the environment public environment sometimes was such that there was no way we were going to be able to push it through.
And that was Anne Sherry there. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, we'll talk to Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka, the co-leader of the Maori Party, about why they won't be going to Waitangi. Precious wetlands in Kaikoura that have been drained and degraded for generations are now being lovingly restored and protected in projects that landowners and farmers hope will inspire others to do the same. Those behind the restoration work say changing attitudes among farmers is helping create more awareness about protecting natural habitat in farms. The Canterbury Regional Council, which is supporting the work, says although it will take decades for the wetlands to fully recover, there are already promising signs. Our reporter Ananzaki and cameraman Nate McKinnon went to Kaikoura to find out more.
About 5 minutes' drive from the Kaikoura township is the home of Barb Woods. Around these parts, local hospitality is on full display for anyone who visits. That means a cup of tea and a bite to nibble on. Ms Woods has been living in the area for about 50 years and established the Ngāri wetland on a property which has been drained and dairy farmed for generations. The property actually consists of 2 wetlands. She closed off the first wetland around 10 years ago in order to restore it to pre-settlement conditions and to help out a pesky native.
For the pukekos originally, I know they're vicious little creatures, but they're very cute and they're native and they deserve to be here, really.
Ms Woods says the love for nature runs through the family.
Oh yes, well my father was a great naturalist and environmentalist, a very gentle person and a deep thinker. So he had a wonderful philosophy and I kind of latched onto his philosophies probably.
Ms Woods says a lot of help for her restoration has come from the Canterbury Regional Council, better known as Environment Canterbury.
They really have supported me very, very well with the fencing, and Heath has been wonderful with drumming up planting bees, and Heath has included school children.
The person she's referring to is Heath Melville, Land Management and Biodiversity Advisor for the Council. Taking us through the Ngāri wetland, he explains how the wetland is slowly being restored to its former glory.
Yeah, we want to establish vegetation on the north side so it shades out the stream and it reduces some of the plants that are growing in the stream, which can cause fluctuations in oxygen.
It's hard work, but the efforts are there for all to see.
We've planted quite a few flax in here. There's not a huge amount that we've planted in the wetland, a decent amount around these wet margins where we've planted, but there's quite a concentration of flax in here. So yeah, it'd be nice to have that established as a bit of a flax land in here.
Further away is the Mount Fife wetland, which is also a restoration and protection project by a local farmer. Heath Melville says it's another special place.
Well, one of the things that makes this wetland quite significant for us locally here is the presence of this species, Astelia grandis. Oh, I can see a big wolf spider on that, which is really quite cool. So there's a good population of Astelia grandis in here, which is really common on the west coast, but this is the only site that we know of in the Kaikoura zone that has this plant.
Heath Melville admits getting farmers on board hasn't always been the easiest task, as people aren't always too willing to give up some land.
Trying to get these projects over the line is a real challenge, but I mean quite often, yeah, back and forth with the landowner, they do start to get a sense of what we're trying to do, and the pieces of land that we're talking about retiring and restoring, they don't hold a huge amount of value for grazing.
Just south of Kaikoura in Paqueta, Spencer Kahu, aged just 22, manages a dairy farm on land part owned by his family. The land is home to the Kaikoura region's largest wetland, Lake Rotorua. He says the lake was in poor shape until about 4 years ago, when Mr Kahu had a boundary fence installed.
It's just made the whole lake a lot more healthy. It was when I first got out here, I was doing test samples with Cawthorn Institute out here and testing the water and sending it away once a week. And there was a real bad algae back then, and ever since we've done the fence and limited the stock getting in near the lake and whatnot, it's real turned the lake around, yeah.
Mr Kahu says giving up a bit of land for nature to re-establish itself is a sacrifice worth making and is important to tangata whenua.
Me as a Māori, I think Māori think with their stomachs more than bloody anything, so, you know, we got the trout and we got the eels, and down on the outlet there we've got the flounder.
Such as the destruction of natural habitat since human settlement, everyone involved knows that it's a multi-generational project. Barb Woods won't be around to see the wetlands back to full health, but she's fine with that.
It's a very slow process, really. It took 100 years to destroy it, so it's going to probably take another 100 years to restore it, I imagine. If we don't start, we will never finish.
Environment Canterbury says every zone in the province has $100,000 a year for freshwater-related restoration projects and are hopeful it will attract more landowners. In Kaikoura for Checkpoint, Anand Zaki.
New Zealanders can soon dive into history in remote Fiordland and explore the country's oldest known shipwreck as part of a new documentary series. Last winter, Toitu, Otago Settlers Museum, organised for professional maritime archaeologists to survey 3 sites. Tess Brunton spoke to those on the expedition ahead of the documentary's launch.
Hidden away in the heart of Fiordland's remote wilderness lies relics of Aotearoa's history buried beneath the waves in Tamatea Dusky Sound. It's home to the first known meeting of southern iwi with Captain James Cook, where more than 240 people were marooned after the 1795 Endeavour, which isn't Cook's ship, was shipwrecked, and much more. But getting there is no easy or cheap task. It's a 4 to 5 day tramp in, a flight or a 5-hour boat trip that leaves Deep Cove in Doubtful Sound. In July, an expedition team organised by Toitu Otago Settlers Museum ventured by boat to Tamatea to see what they could discover.
Far out. It's not the easiest to walk on, is it?
Toitu curator Sean Brosnahan scripts and presents the 7-part documentary that captures the trip. He feels for those on the Endeavour who found themselves shipwrecked and forced to live in unforgiving Fiordland for an unknown period of time.
When you're in that really challenging, right, it's pouring with rain and the bush is so dense, and maybe you had to feed yourself from what you could catch around the place, which down there, there's plenty of fish in the sea and all the rest of it. Nonetheless, the thought of being stranded there when they came from Sydney, hot, sunny Sydney, and here they are in wet, quite cool Fiordland, to understand that sort of perspective and take yourself back in time. That's really the driver, I think, the story, the human interest part of the stories.
He remembers watching divers disappear beneath the waves, thinking how significant remote Dusky Sound is to Aotearoa's shared heritage. For maritime archaeologist Dr Matthew Carter, diving to the shipwreck of the 1795 Endeavour was on his bucket list, but he wasn't expecting to see much, as others described it as a pile of rocks.
These ships had to have rocks to balance them, but what we saw is that this amazing kind of ballast pile, and underneath it were these timbers which were, from 1795. They've been underwater for that long, and yet they were in, perfectly intact condition with copper fastings, all the rest of it. So as a maritime archaeologist, this is an incredibly well-preserved site from that long ago.
It wasn't smooth sailing. The survey was done in winter in the middle of remote Fiordland.
We were getting hailed on before we even got in the water, so the hail's bouncing off us, and we're kind of looking at each other going, are we actually going to do this? But I suppose the advantage of that was that it keeps the sand flies down. But just an incredible place to work, so remote, and the ship we were on had everything we needed to work productively in those really chilly conditions.
The expedition was the brainchild of the museum's exhibition developer, William McKee, who first started thinking about the trip back in lockdown. The museum is home to a hunk of wood and a broken bottle from the Endeavour, and he was curious to see what remained.
The Endeavour has been firstly attempted to be salvaged and then basically pilfered over that time, because everyone that went there, you take away a bit of a souvenir. So sadly, that's how there is so much of that collection in museums around. So it's a great opportunity to be able to confirm there's still stuff there and then look at further ways of protecting.
He's hopeful the documentary series will inspire more to learn about Aotearoa's history and could trigger other exploration missions. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
And if you were listening to that, we'll put Tessa's piece up on our Facebook page because there's some great footage there to look at. In news just to hand, the Ministry of Health has released an updated list of places of interest. Now, these relate to the current community COVID cases, other places that the latest infected people have travelled to. Some of them, Dahua Supermarket in Northcote. There is a bank in there as well, ASB or Waido Park. Some other visits to supermarkets, New World, Pack and Save, and a service station, but we'll have all those details for you after 6. In terms of managed isolation, feedback here from Anne, a small number of returnees seem to be flying to Australia after COVID isolation, and we're paying.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The COVID-19 response minister believes day zero testing will help avoid the possibility of returnees contracting COVID-19 while in managed isolation. 3 people are suspected to have been infected while staying in the Pullman Hotel in Auckland. Mass testing is underway of guests, staff and people who may have been casual contacts to ensure there aren't further cases in the community. Chris Hipkins says day zero testing was introduced after the 3 cases arrived at the hotel.
They weren't subject to that, say, day zero, day one testing. So that change has already been made, and that will make a difference in the future.
Chris Hipkins says all guests are now required to stay in their rooms after their day 12 test until they leave as an interim measure. A steady stream of people are turning up at COVID-19 testing centres on Auckland's North Shore. The Ministry of Health says as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, the wait time in Orewa was under 15 minutes, while at Albany it was about 30 minutes. Since Sunday, more than 14,000 tests from metropolitan Auckland have been processed. All have been negative, except for the 2 latest community cases. Testing staff say members of the public have been in good spirits today. The Australian government has announced it will extend its freeze of quarantine-free travel with New Zealand for 3 more days. The initial 72-hour suspension was due to expire at 2 o'clock this afternoon. However, Australian health officials are now seeking further information about the latest 2 cases in Auckland. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she retains confidence in this country's systems and processes. However, she does acknowledge the decision to extend the freeze is for the Australian government to make. The National Iwi Chair's Pandemic Response Group wants the number of New Zealanders returning home to be restricted to 1,500 a week. 5,480 people are set to come into the country in the next 2 weeks. The principal advisor to the National Iwi Chair's Pandemic Response Group, Rawiri Taunui, says it is no longer sustainable to allow this number of arrivals.
There have been no breaches when the average number of returnees has been 2,000 or lower. So the 1,500 mark is to take account of the increased international risk and pressure on borders. That's suggested as a first step, and if that doesn't work, it might need to come down further.
Dr Taunui says pre-departure testing isn't working as some passengers aren't providing proof of a negative test. The National Iwi Pandemic Response Group also wants all arrivals to be tested immediately on landing. The Trade Minister has suggested Australia should speak with more diplomacy when it comes to China, so it too can have a mature bilateral relationship. Damien O'Connor told business media if Australia was to follow New Zealand and show respect and be diplomatic, the relationship between the countries would improve. Relations between Australia and China hit an historic low after a number of diplomatic clashes last year. Following the comments, Mr O'Connor said the Australia-China relationship is a matter for those 2 countries alone. National says the comments are unhelpful and extremely undiplomatic. Singapore has detained a 16-year-old boy for intending to attack 2 mosques. Plans the authorities there say were inspired by the mosque shootings in Christchurch in March 2019. The Singapore government says the teenager bought a tactical vest online and intended to buy a machete. He had conducted reconnaissance of the mosques near his home, intended to live stream his attack and prepared statements that referenced Christchurch attacker Brenton Tarrant. The department also said he planned to carry out the attack on the anniversary of the Christchurch mosque killings. The teenager, said to be an Indian Christian, is the first in the island nation to be detained for far-right extremist ideology. A set of 10 hand-drawn maps, which are the only known contemporary drawings of the defeat by the English Navy of the Spanish Armada in 1588, will remain in the UK. The British government imposed an export ban when it was revealed the maps were being sold to a collector in the United States. Now $800,000 has been raised to keep them in Britain. The Waikato Regional Council is having to set up turtle traps after a Coromandel beach became inundated with the animals. Biosecurity Officer Andrew McConnell says the red-eared slider turtles, which can live for up to 30 years, are often bought as pets, but he says they quickly grow to the size of a dinner plate and people then dump them in the wild, including at Cook's Beach. Any turtles caught will be rehomed by animal rescue groups. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Breakers guard Corey Webster is becoming increasingly frustrated at their poor start to the ANBL basketball season. The Auckland-based side have lost their opening 2 games after an 88-78 defeat to Adelaide last night. Webster says the team needs to stand up and take responsibility.
It's early days, but we've got high expectations of our team. We're in a unique situation where we're on the road. We don't have the crowd's energy to feed off like playing at home, so we need to come together closer as a team and we need to do it quickly.
The Breakers play Perth this weekend. Manchester United has suffered a shock 2-1 home loss to Sheffield United in football's English Premier League. Sheffield's first win at Old Trafford in 48 years also left Manchester City alone at the top of the table. Meanwhile, All Whites striker Chris Wood headed in a late winner in Burnley's 3-2 win over Aston Villa. The result moved Burnley 10 points clear of the relegation zone, with Wood's winner coming 15 minutes before the final whistle.
Super cross and Wood has snuck it in! What about that? Chris Wood puts Burnley in front for the first time this evening.
Chelsea and Wolves drew 0-0, as did Fulham and Brighton. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance assesses the benefits of community gardening, not so much the crop as the shared social commitment. Oh, and the great compost. Worlds of Music host Trevor Reekie shares some of his favourite songs of 2020 with Song Crush host Tony Stam. And our first overseas correspondent of the new year is Peggy Ravel, on the line from a very cold Medicine Hat in Canada. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine spells with brief light showers possible tonight and again tomorrow afternoon and evening. Waikato, Waitomo, Central High Country. Fine spells with a few showers today. Taranaki to Wellington and Wairarapa, a few showers clearing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, but a few showers spreading north tonight, then becoming confined to the coast tomorrow. For Marlborough and Canterbury, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail in Canterbury tonight. Showers becoming isolated tomorrow morning. For Nelson, Buller, Westland, Northern Fiordland, Southern Lakes, Central and North Otago. Cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing Fiordland and Otago this evening. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Southern Fiordland, showers, some heavy easing tonight. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, a few showers from this evening. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Ministry of Health has added some new locations to its list of places visited by the country's 2 latest COVID cases. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is across the latest developments and joins me live in the studio. So Nick, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Lisa, so as you've just said, 2 new cases added to that original list. The first is Dahua Supermarket in Northcote. They visited that on the 26th of January. Now they've put very specific times on these 2 new locations. On that one, there's a time between 12:57 p.m. on the 26th of January and 1:45 on the 26th of January. If you were there between those times, stay home, get tested, and call Healthline is the advice. The other location, of course, is ASB Wairoa Valley on the 21st of January. And also specific times there, 2:06 p.m. and 2:09 p.m. on the 21st of January. Again, the advice, stay home and get tested if you're at the ASB.
So we know that this is a father and a young daughter, and from what Ashley Bloomfield tells us, they were tested on Wednesday. So they were also out on the Wednesday?
Yeah, they were out on the Wednesday. So if we just... Well, that was the 26th, wasn't it? Yeah, the 26th. So the 26th, they were out at Dahua supermarket, one of those new locations in Northcote. And also on the 26th, one of the original locations from the original list, Tai Ping supermarket between 12:57 and 1:45 p.m.
So there's some more information that they may have visited some places we knew about, but more frequently.
Yes, and an example of that is Barbecue King restaurant. Now, Barbecue King was obviously already on the original list. Further visits have been added to the new list. 2 more visits to Barbecue King restaurant, one on the 16th, one on the 15th, both between 5 and 6 p.m.
Right. We should clarify that in our conversation with the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, he's told us that this pair were not waiting on test results while they were out and about. So they were out and about before they had the tests done. And also it took a couple of days for the contact tracers to speak to them directly, and they started isolating as soon as they had that contact with the contact tracers. That's what Ashley Bloomfield has told us. Now, you've been out to check out some of these places today. What did you see?
Yeah, so the first place we went to was Barbecue King in Albany. It was completely shut up today. There was no one there. There was a sign on the door in Mandarin, which we had translated, which said it was closed for a deep clean today. This was 12 p.m. Probably, you could assume, usually a busy lunch hour for them, but they lose a day's trading. The other place we went to was Farmers in the Mall at Albany. We spoke to a manager there. He said they weren't planning on closing at this stage. I think from memory, I'll just double check that. Yeah, the time there was only an hour, and that was on the 24th. The manager there said they're not planning on closing at this stage, but they are receiving a number of calls from customers saying, what's going on? What time are these people there? What do I need to do? He didn't say much more than that. He sort of pushed us higher up the ranks to speak to his manager. So.
Thanks very much. That's Nick Trubridge with the latest on those locations that are connected to 2 of the COVID cases in the community. If you're concerned, you can go onto the Ministry of Health website. There is a full list there of the locations, the times that the pair were there, and also instructions specific to what you need to do. And they are different for each particular location. So check them out on the Ministry of Health website. COVID has curbed Waitangi commemorations for the Maori Party. The co-leaders have decided not to travel north because of concerns over the latest community cases. 3 people have caught the more contagious South Africa strain of the virus while in MIQ at Auckland's Pullman hotel, but were released into the community before it was picked up. The hotel shut to new guests until authorities work out how it spread. Te Pāti Māori says it's decided to err on the side of caution. Co-leader Debbie Ngāti Wapaka joins me now. Kia ora, Debbie. Why have you decided not to head north?
Look, I think it's important for us to be able to do what we can do to ease the anxiety and the weight that a lot of local, including our tangata whenua, are feeling. And this is a practical way of being able to achieve that.
The Director General Health and the Minister as well today at their press briefing said there was no reason to avoid travel and no reason to avoid Waitangi at the moment. So do you have any different information to what they have?
Well, I think, first of all, we had information yesterday a lot sooner than before Ministry of Health became public. So there is a real chasm, a gap in between what they find out, what we hear from our hauora, and then what they release publicly. That puts us in a position of being really unsure of confidence in real-time information that we can, adjust to as communities. The second thing is that Raui and I both come from vulnerable communities, as is in Taitokerau. We are watching our whānau on the ground doing what they can do to deal with the uncertainties, and that includes putting up borders, that includes limiting movement, and I think this is something that we can do. We can be vigilant, we can scan, we can keep up sanitisation, but we also can restrict our movements. And we feel for this community. We know exactly how we would feel if it was in Taranaki or in Tairāwhiti. So we will always put whakapapa first and politics second.
So you say you've taken advice from your people. Who and what were they saying to you? What are their worries?
Well, their worries are that they're unresourced and under-resourced and underfunded, that there isn't the support to look after them. We saw, a crazy influx of things when, the announcement first came out. They're worried that there's a lot of uncertainty. They're worried that there's assurance that everything's under control. Then, 12 hours later, there's more. They're worried that centres that should have had everything under control, like MIQs, aren't. And the world has shown us how tricky this virus is. It's highly contagious. And, I think, there are things that we can do to mitigate risks. And for us, it is as simple as not, creating more flow of traffic and people into the area. It's a long weekend, and when everyone goes in and leaves, they're the ones that are left, with the consequences. So this is about doing what's right by those that have to live there every day.
Debbie, you mentioned the flow of information. What do you think of the way the latest 2 cases, the information around that and how it was released?
I think any time during a pandemic that we see media stonewalled by officials, we should be extremely concerned. And it makes no sense why they would do that and if things weren't in place. So, I hate to sound churlish, but I was extremely concerned to watch the time delay between us, all hearing and being asked by media and then finally having, a release coming out from the ministry, and so late before anybody can prepare. So it brings into question confidence that we have in the system. And that's okay. We are all going to be under stress. This is new, it's unprecedented. But we actually need to be forthcoming about that so we can front foot. We can use our influences collectively to be able to pivot to what the situations are. We can't treat this like bureaucrats do. We actually have to deal with this together. And this is Te Pāti Māori's way of being able to do that. I really urge that they, treat media with respect and bring out the information for us all as soon as they know.
So, Debbie, you're not heading up to Waitangi, and, I'm wondering if you think the Prime Minister should still go.
I think what the Prime Minister and the government do is up to them to decide. I think, we as a party live and breathe Te Tiriti. We are here to uphold the Te Tiriti. If, the government really wanted to do something, they could do something really simple, like, I don't know, maybe, amend the legislation that's as racist as the Māori wards that we're waiting for Nanaia to deal with. For us, I think it's the right thing to do. It's up for them to decide what they do.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That is the Maori Party co-leader, Debbie Ngārewa-Paka. It is 17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. People have been queuing at COVID testing centres in North Auckland in response to the latest community cases. Our reporter Kate Gregan and camera operator Dan Cook filed this report.
The queue at the Victor Eves pop-up testing centre in Orewa started off strong. Hundreds of cars, at one point 2 to 3 kilometres long, snaking through the park and down the road. These people all waiting for a COVID test after the 2 new community cases visited locations in the town, as well as Albany, Silverdale and Northcote. One local woman says she arrived at the testing station before it opened, after discovering she visited the same location as the positive cases.
I was keeping an eye on where they had visited last night and got up this morning and just double-checked through bank statements and thought I'd better come down. I phoned Healthline first of all and they advised for me to come down.
Another in line visited a supermarket on the same day as the positive cases, but she's not too concerned.
I just think that we should all do our bit, If we were there, we should get tested, and we certainly don't want COVID coming back, that's for sure.
With Auckland anniversary weekend just around the corner, she might reconsider her long weekend plans.
Oh, well, obviously I need to wait till I get a negative test, but, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe we should just stay home.
This man waiting in line for his COVID test agrees.
I think we should just be staying in our community, I think.
Keeping safe.
Keeping safe, yeah.
The testing station also allowed people to walk up and get a test.
I parked up across the road and walked across the road, mate, because stuff's sitting in that queue. But no, good on them, they're doing a great job. There's like 20 people out here.
Gary Brown, who's the chairman of Hibiscus and Bay's local board, was at Victor Eves Park and was surprised by the amount of people.
I mean, a long line. It looks like 2 or 3 kilometres of cars, but so it shows that there is concern in the area and people are doing their homework and maybe coming down and getting tested, which is important.
The line of cars eased throughout the morning, with everyone seemingly relaxed and waiting patiently. Sally Dalhousie is the Chief Operating Officer at the Whono, a community healthcare service. She led the Orewa testing station today and had snacks and water on hand for those waiting to be swabbed. A much different scenario to what happened earlier this week in Northland. Sally says they were prepared.
We've done this a few times, we've been through this drill, so we just had to get things all hands on deck.
And early this morning she said everyone was in high spirits.
Oh, so far so good, but like I said, we'll see how we're going in about 3 hours. Might be a bit harder.
And had advice for those still waiting in line.
Just bring your snacks, but we have got some here. And just be prepared to take some deep breaths in.
It was a similar scene further south in Albany. And how long have you been out here waiting today?
Oh, not long now, maybe 10, 12 minutes, but it looks like I'm in for a long haul. Yep.
And how are you preparing for this long wait today?
Well, I got my work here with me, I got my sandwich here, my water, so I'm prepared to be here for maybe, it looks like a couple hours.
Health officials say some people need to wait to be tested if they were at the locations of interest very recently and should check the COVID-19 website or call Healthline. For Checkpoint, this is Kate Gregan.
Late this afternoon, Australia's acting Chief Medical Officer, Michael Kidd, announced the Trans-Tasman bubble would be suspended for another 72 hours until Sunday at the earliest, whilst health officials here investigate how at least 3 people contracted the virus whilst in managed isolation at Auckland's Pullman Hotel. Of the biggest concern is the whereabouts of at least a dozen people who stayed at the Pullman Hotel at the same time in early January, but have since travelled on to Australia.
We know that 12 people who are in quarantine at the Pullman Hotel have arrived in Sydney. 3 of these people have travelled on to Hong Kong and the authorities there have been advised. 2 of these people travelled on to Queensland and the authorities there have also been advised. The others are all being followed up in New South Wales and are being tested. If I receive additional information about further arrivals, I will provide further advice. On Monday, I advised that anyone who had arrived in Australia on a flight from New Zealand on or since January the 14th should isolate and arrange to get tested and remain in isolation until their results are known. I'm now extending that advice. Anyone who has arrived in Australia on a flight from New Zealand on or since January the 9th is asked to isolate and arrange to get a test and remain in isolation until they've received a negative test result. In particular, if you were in hotel quarantine or a guest or a staff member at the Pullman Hotel in Auckland between January the 9th and January the 14th, please isolate at your home, arrange to get tested for COVID-19 and follow the advice of the health authorities in your state.
And that is Australia's acting Chief Medical Officer, Michael Kidd. A lot of you are not happy about people jumping the ditch off the back of taxpayer-supported MIQ. This from David, who says, does this mean New Zealand taxpayers are picking up the isolation tab for Kiwis wishing to travel to Aussie? This also means New Zealand MIQ places are being pilfered by New Zealanders immediately going on to Australia, when many others wishing to come home permanently are unable to obtain an MIQ space. Another person says a number of these returnees have left the Pullman and flown to Australia. So New Zealand pays for their quarantine, and once they are released, they are off to another country. We subsidise it, don't we, Anne? I mean, they pay for part of it, unless they intend to stay in here in New Zealand. I think it is 90 days or longer. In respect of the suspension of travel between New Zealand and Australia, this listener says, I support the suspension of the travel bubble the Aussies are doing. Hopefully it's just a temporary inconvenience. If you travel now, you just have to take into account that things might not go without a hitch. Well, forget storks. Flamingos have delivered newborns to Auckland Zoo. In the past fortnight, 2 chicks have hatched, the latest born to very rangy parents, Lizzie and Nelson. Carl Ashworth, team leader birds at Auckland Zoo, says the newest flamingo chick is doing great after busting out of its very super reinforced egg.
He's doing really, really well, yeah. Feeding really well off mum and dad. He's starting to wander around now and find his feet, which is really great. So he's hitting all the milestones that we want him to hit. So, yeah, we're really pleased.
So you know he's a he already?
Well, we don't know. That's unfortunate. We won't know that until he's probably a year and a half. So the females are quite a lot smaller than males. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I don't know much about these majestic creatures, so can you just explain a bit to us? I mean, what do they come in? An egg the size of a kiwi egg, or is it like your number 8 4 to an omelette, or what's the deal?
It's about probably quarter the size of a kiwi egg, so not that big. They're quite special eggs, though. They're covered in a really thick calcium, which is quite unusual for eggs. And the reason for that is in the wild they can get rolled around in the mud and then get a lot of salt on them, and that still enables them to be able to breathe. So it's quite an important part of their development, really.
So is it a bit of an effort for them to bash their way out of that then?
Oh, yeah, it's quite a tiring job, yeah. So it can take a couple of days from when they, what we call externally pip, so that's when they break, the outer shell. But they have a little, what's called an egg tooth on their bill, which disappears after they hatch, and that helps them to break out. But it's quite a tiring process. So when they first come out, they're all wet and they look very tired, and then mum will sit on them for a while and then warm them up, and then they'll start to look fluffy with their little fat pink legs. So that's when they start to look like proper flamingo chicks.
Here's the thing, Carl. I've had a look at this little one, and he's kind of greyish, right? Why is he not pink?
So they're not pink straight away because that's down feather, so that's to keep them nice and warm while they're young, and they won't start to develop the pink feathers until they're about a year and a half old. But the parents feed them what's called crop milk, which is bright red. It looks a bit like a colour of blood, and that's actually their own colouring, their own pink colouring, given it to the chick.
So what is that milk then?
So it's actually the lining of their crop, so their throat essentially, and then they regurgitate that and feed the chick. So the chicks have a special groove in their bill, and so do the parents, and they kind of hook it in, and they slowly dribble that food down into their throat to feed them, and that's got all the nutrients and everything that the chick needs.
So mum and dad here, do they hang around and raise this bird?
Yeah, so they both parents are both active with the chick, so they both.
So this is Lizzie and Nelson.
Yeah, this is Lizzie and Nelson. So they both feed it. They both look after it in equal amounts. So they share nesting, they share feeding and the rearing of the chick and teaching it to swim. So they both do the whole 9 yards for it.
So when is it going to get those big rangy long legs? How long before it gets to full height?
It will be probably about a year and a half to 2 years before it's a full-grown flamingo.
Okay, so you guys obviously not for profit. I see there's a bit of an opportunity here to be involved with the flamingos. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we're doing a really exciting Trade Me auction at the moment. So you'll be able to come to the zoo and get to weigh one of the flamingo chicks, which is, quite a special experience. And the reason we do that, we track the weight of the chick, so we're making sure it's reaching the milestones that he's supposed to and growing exactly, the right amount and putting the same amount of weight on that we want him to. So you'll be able to come in and do that, and then we'll give you a little tour of the forest, Avery, and take you around, show you all the different birds. So that's up on Trade Me at the moment.
Cool. Who gets to name it?
Well, maybe the person that wins the auction. We will see. So we're going to ask for different names and then pick the best one.
Carl, in a lifetime, how many chicks would a flamingo have?
So flamingos are quite long-lived, so they can live up to 60 years old. I would expect them to start breeding around 4 to 5 years old, and they will carry on, I would say, until they're pretty old, so into their 40s.
Okay.
So that's quite a lot.
Now, we love a good collective noun here at Checkpoint. So, can you tell us what the collective noun is for a bunch of flamingos?
It is a flamboyance, which is pretty awesome.
It's great and seems highly appropriate. Are they flamboyant?
They're extremely flamboyant, yes. So in the wintertime, when you come to the zoo, you'll see them, what they're doing, they're flocking rituals. So they'll be all very noisy and all running up and down together and flagging their heads.
And that was Carl Ashworth from Auckland Zoo. Get yourself online. We'll put the pictures up there and you can see the flamboyance of flamingos and the new baby chick, which is cutely tucked under its mother's wing. And there is that opportunity to be involved with them, to weigh the new chick and potentially name it. Just some quick feedback before we go. This person on the Te Tai Tokerau border control checkpoints that have been stopped by the police, Brian reckons it was the wrong decision and they shouldn't have done that. On Stavro and his encounter with the shark, someone says his account of the shark bumping his Opti was pure gold. Yes, it was. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The COVID response minister believes that testing on day 0 or day 1 will help avoid returnees contracting COVID-19 while in managed